The only time my family ever moved when I was growing up was shortly after my youngest brother was born. There were already 4 of us siblings and not nearly enough bedrooms to go around. My parents ideally wanted us all to have our own rooms as we got older, so they bought a 3-story Victorian-style house. Having a 3-story house was pretty neat, and I actually still own the house today. Definitely having my own bedroom for the first time ever was the neatest thing of all, though. There was 1 bedroom room and 1 study on the top floor of the house, along with a bathroom. Then there was a door that led to a staircase that took you into the attic. It wasn't one of those attics you could live in, though. It was more of a place to store things in. That was really about it. Up there, though, there was no real ceiling either, just the pink insulation under the roof. In typical horror movie fashion, there were several things stored in the attic that the previous owners of the home had left there. Most of it wasn't anything of interest, though boxes of old books, tons of boxes full of National Geographic magazines. There was a desk with a vanity mirror on it, and some poles with old clothes hanging down from them. I took the bedroom on the top floor simply because I thought it was the coolest room. It had a big outside window with a cushioned couch to sit on. I really liked it. None of my other siblings fought me for it either, because it also happened to be the smallest bedroom in the home. I didn't really mind though, because it was so cool. About 2 weeks after we moved in, I was laying in bed when I heard what I thought sounded like music coming down from the attic. I mostly dismissed it the first time. I figured it may have been coming from one of the other bedrooms, and I was simply confusing it as coming from above me. This, however, changed when the following night I heard the same song once again. It was an extremely faint tune, definitely coming from somewhere above me. The following day at breakfast, I asked my family if any of them had been in the attic the night before or the night before that. They all seemed surprised at the question. When I told them I heard a small tune being played up there, they all just chalked it up to my imagination. How typical. Well, the tune ended up not going away. I heard it again and again for the next several nights. It didn't play all night either, only for about 10 minutes at the same time every night. I honestly believed one of my siblings was messing with me. Eventually, I decided I would keep an eye on the door one night and see if any of them had gone up there. I would know for sure they were messing with me then. After going up in the attic one night, just to make sure no one was in there, I turned my bedroom light off and crouched beside the door. I watched and saw that no one had come or gone into the attic. But at around 11 p.m., I once more heard the song begin to play. I was a bit scared now, but extremely curious as to what was going on here. I decided I would go into the attic and find out. I was more than a little bit afraid now, but my curiosity overrode my fear. I crept out of my room and slowly over to the attic door. I opened it up and turned on the attic light. I went up the stairs and kept expecting someone to jump out and grab me at any moment. Once I was up the stairs, I was able to finally tell where the music was coming from. It was coming from that desk with the vanity mirror. Going slowly over to it, I noticed that one of the drawers was now slightly open. I pulled it open all the way and took a look inside. Placed directly in the center of the drawer was this small music box playing the tune. I picked it up and inspected it. It was a simple box with a lid on it still playing. As I held it in my hands, lifting the lid, I could see that it had a glass top on it that showed you the inner workings of the box. When I turned it upside down, though, I felt my heart begin beating in my chest. There was a wind-up lever on the bottom of the box. There was no way it could play on its own unless someone had wound it up, and that meant someone was in the attic with me. I hadn't seen anyone enter or leave since I'd begun watching. Quickly closing the box, I sprinted down the stairs and woke my dad. I explained to him what I'd found. He came to the same conclusion I did. He grabbed a bat and went to explore the attic. What he found gives me chills to this day. In the attic, off to the very far end, happened to be a very small door that led to a cubbyhole. We hadn't noticed it before. When he opened the cubbyhole, there was a small old woman cowering inside. She had empty cans of food and water and smelled foul beyond description. He closed the hole back up and held it closed while my mom called the police. The woman happened to be the sister of the older lady we'd bought the house from. She was quite mentally ill and couldn't bring herself to leave the home when her sister moved. Instead, she chose to hide in the cubbyhole and only come out when we were all asleep. I guess the music box helped soothe her. I have no idea why she left it in the drawer rather than taking it into the hiding place with her. Who knows how long she might have been able to hide up there if I hadn't heard that music box. It was quite a weird event. You know, paranoia is a very strange thing. It can really cause you a lot of problems, actually, but paranoia itself is not necessarily a bad thing. It can help you out often. When I was in my early teens, my family moved from the city out to the country. It was quite the transition, going straight from a city life to living in a house that was at least a 15 minutes drive from the nearest one over. My dad, however, had always dreamed of being a farmer, and since we were extremely comfortable financially, he was able to take a chance and pursue that dream. I had one older brother and one younger sister. Being the middle kid, I often had to feel like I was the bridge between the two. My brother was 16 at the time, and even though he was a pretty decent kid for the most part, like most older brothers, he occasionally liked to pick on me and my sister. My sister was 7 when we moved into the new house. It was a nice brick house on a ranch, with a very large basement. The basement was half finished, meaning it had cinder block walls, but still wasn't in any way exposed to the outside. It didn't have any carpeting or sheetrock like the rest of the house. My dad and my mom put all our toys down in the basement. It was officially our playroom, sort of. Not long after we moved in, though, my sister began to act very strangely. She began talking to herself when she was in the basement alone. The first time it happened, my parents asked her what was going on. She told them she'd made a new friend, Gus, an older man who liked to visit her in the basement. At first, my parents were quite alarmed, thinking someone must have broken into the house. It didn't take very long for them to determine that. Gus seemed to be nothing more than a figment of my sister's imagination. Though Gus became a regular topic of discussion concerning my sister, she would bring up all the times he would come and talk to her in the basement. Often I would hear her talking to this Gus. I would go down and check just to see if anyone really was down there. Conveniently, though, whenever I asked her, Gus had always left immediately before I came down. While the talking about Gus didn't really bother me, as I never had any imaginary friends myself, and didn't understand why anyone would want to, my brother was sick and tired of hearing our sister talk about him all the time. He would just get aggravated at her and tell her to shut up about her dumb and fake friend. About 5 months later, our parents were in town, and my brother was supposed to be watching my sister and I. My brother had this weird and annoying habit that whenever our parents weren't at home, he'd sneak into my parents' room and try to grab my dad's old collection of adult films. Then he would set them up and watch them in the middle of the living room. He did this because the picture window in the living room faced a long driveway, and he would know when my parents were coming home. My sister and I were always forbidden from going in there, not that I would have wanted to at that age anyway. On this day, my sister had once again been downstairs talking to Gus. I was in the kitchen grabbing myself a snack. Unexpectedly, my sister sprinted up the stairs and into the living room, surprising my brother. He had to very quickly shut the TV off. "Hey, Gus told me you were watching bad movies. You better stop that," my sister yelled at him. "I'm so sick of hearing about this Gus," my angry brother yelled in response. "There's no such person. Stop being an idiot." Of course my sister got upset. My brother had made her cry. I came to her defense and told him that her talking about Gus didn't really hurt us in any way. He got irritated with me and told me I was encouraging her to act foolish. When I continued to defend my sister, my brother got up and grabbed me by the arm. "Oh yeah, fine. Well, why don't you spend some time down there with him?" Then he began to pull me over to the basement door. Now I spent a lot of time in the basement by myself, so I wasn't really scared to be down there. Still, though, no one likes to be forced somewhere they don't want to be. I struggled, but of course there was no way I could overpower my brother, who easily dragged me and shoved me down to the basement. Once I was in, he locked the door and yelled at me to make sure I said hi to Gus. I was so pissed off because I didn't want to be in the basement. I suddenly remembered that there was an outside door. There was a stairwell on the side of the house that led into the basement. The door at the bottom was locked from the inside. Feeling smart after having outwitted my brother, I turned to walk to the door. I stopped dead in my tracks when I saw a grown man standing in the window of that door in the stairwell, staring down at me. He held up his hand and gave me a little finger wave. Then he took off. Now scared out of my mind, I ran up the stairs to the inside door my brother had locked and began to pound on it, screaming at my brother to open the door. I was yelling there was someone in our yard, but finally I was able to get my brother to respond and let me out. I told him about the man in the stairwell. He sprinted out into the yard to look around, but of course no one was there. He initially chalked it up to me, just wanting to give him a hard time about being a jerk. But when I described the man to my sister, she smiled and said, "Yeah, that was Gus. It was really freaky. I mean, I don't know who Gus was or if he meant my sister any harm." According to her, she never saw him again after. For months on end, though, my sister had been playing with an imaginary friend who was anything but imaginary. Hi, I'm Ethan. When I was growing up, I was definitely a bit of an unpopular and bookish sort. I got bullied quite a lot. It was a shame because I actually enjoyed going to school. There was this one guy at school named Richard who always made going extremely sucky. He was one really messed up kid, always trying to get into fights with everyone. Once, on the way home from school, I saw him hanging out in an empty lot with his buddies torturing a bird. They had shot it with a BB gun and ripped its feathers out while it was still alive. The guy obviously had some severe issues. Fortunately for me, he and his friends did not catch me that time, and I ran off as quickly as I could. In regards to me in particular, he would call me all sorts of names. Knock my books out of my hands. Typical bully stuff. He would always try to get me to fight him, but of course I never wanted to do that. When I was 13, my parents were going to be at a party very late one night. I was an only child, and they felt their teen was now old enough to stay home alone. So they left me. They gave me a number I could call for emergencies, but this was long before cell phones. They let me know they wouldn't be home until very late, like in the late morning. That was okay with me, though. I would get to stay home and read and enjoy my alone time. About an hour after my parents left, the phone began to ring. I answered it and froze when I recognized the voice as being Richard the bully. "Hey, I know your parents aren't home tonight. No one is going to protect you this time." I didn't even respond. I just hung up the phone. I walked away, but immediately as I did, it rang again. I picked it up and there was Richard. "Don't you dare hang up on me. I'll rip your fingers off your body with a pair of pliers." I told him I would call the police if he tried to do anything to me and hung up the phone again. It began to ring, but I didn't want to answer it. Richard was being more persistent than I ever imagined he would be. The phone continued to ring again and again and again. Not knowing what else to do, I picked up the phone and set the receiver down on the counter, then went on my way. If I couldn't keep him from calling me, at least I could keep from hearing the phone ring over and over. I went back to my reading and was surprised at how easily I was able to get Richard out of my mind. That was until less than an hour later when I heard a knock on the door. I got up to answer it, but I could see it was Richard through the window. He was standing on the porch holding a pair of pliers. "I warned you not to hang up on me again. I'm going to rip your fingers off, all 10 of them." I felt my heart freeze. There was no way I was going to let him into the house, obviously, but there was a chance he'd be able to break in. I ran into the kitchen and grabbed the phone. I hung it up, but when I took it back off the cradle, there was no longer a dial tone. I tried to click it a few times before it occurred to me that Richard must not have ever hung up his phone. Back then, if the caller didn't hang up the receiving phone, you couldn't make another phone call. It was then that it got much worse. I heard the glass door shatter and Richard began to scream profanities at me. I didn't know what to do next. I couldn't call my parents and I couldn't call the police. I definitely couldn't get out of the house and run. My parents didn't have a gun and I couldn't fight Richard off. In the time between him breaking the window and him trying to get his hand on the doorknob, a million thoughts flashed through my mind. Finally, I got a flash of inspiration. I ran into the living room to the fireplace. I grabbed the poker, ran over to the door, and when he tried to get through the window, I slashed his hand as hard as I could. He immediately recoiled backward. The stuff he began screaming at me then was much worse than anything I had heard before. For some reason, Richard decided it was a good idea to put his hand back through the window, so I smacked it again and again. Richard was screaming and cursing, telling me all the horrible things he was going to do to me, but I was sure I'd broken his hand by that point. His screams attracted the attention of one of my neighbors who rushed out of the house to see what was going on. I screamed for them to call the police. Richard finally realized he had lost, and he ran off. Soon after, he was arrested and sent to juvenile hall. I haven't seen him since, but I always wonder what would have happened if he actually got into my house.